the deity which God called the shameful idol. It's called the shameful idol in the NIV. In the King James, it's called that shame. I don't know what it's called in the ESV and the New American Standard, but it's talking about this idol, the Baal that they worshipped at Peor. It may have been, what I've read is it may not be the Baal that we were talking about all through Hosea. It may just be the local Baal, the local Baal god of the area that's worshipped at Peor. But nevertheless, this event in Moses' day was mentioned here because it set the pattern for Israel's subsequent history characterized by unfaithfulness. They started here and it just got worse. It's also mentioned in Psalm 106. Let's go look at that. Psalm 106. I did not know this. Psalm 106, verses 28 to 30. I can just read it. I'll read because we're going to go read some more stuff after this. They yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor and ate sacrifices offered to lifeless gods. They provoked the Lord to anger by their wicked deeds, and a plague broke out among them. But Phinehas stood up, intervened, and the plague was checked. So when Phinehas stabbed the Israelite man and the Midianite woman, he ended that business with the plague. But it goes on and talks about all kinds of things in ensuing verses, talking about child sacrifices. Over in 37, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters. They shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters. They sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and so on and so forth. Then you get down to verse 43, and it says, many times he delivered them, but they were bent on rebellion, and they wasted away in their sin. So we've been talking about, it seemed like last week we talked a lot about them wasting away. They got into these situations where they were not worshiping God, and as a result of that, they just wasted it away. They wasted away in their money. They wasted away in their military defenses. They wasted away in their health. We're seeing they're wasting away in their birth rates. We're going to see that as we go on here. But there was that was just something that came up, and I thought you might want to see that in Psalm 106. In Hosea's day, Israel had also defiled herself, making Baal her lover, and like the generation at Peor, they too had engaged in fertility rites. They engaged in sexual immorality under the banner of religious ceremony. Okay, that's what part of this is about. They're mixing all of these pagan rites with the worship of Yahweh, and they turned it into just sexual immorality in the name of worship is what we're talking about. Okay, end of verse 10, it says, and they became as vile as the thing they loved. They became as vile as the thing they worshipped. We talked about this once before. We become like the gods we worship. If we worship materialistic, harsh, and unforgiving gods, we become materialistic, harsh, and unforgiving. You remember talking about that? If we worship a cold, impersonal, and unresponsive God, we become cold, impersonal, and unresponsive. We become like the God we worship. This is why it is so important that we worship Christ. We will become like Christ eventually if we worship Him. To worship Him, you have to understand what that means. To worship Him means that we must take up our cross daily and follow Him. It requires daily commitment. To worship Christ requires daily commitment. Take up your cross daily and follow Him. If you are not taking up your cross, you are not worshiping. It's about that simple. If you are not worshiping, if you're not taking up your cross, if you're not responding to situations and to God in the way Christ would respond to him, you are not worshiping. And that is not just being in church on Sunday, it is daily. Work where you work, where you play bridge, where you do water aerobics, wherever you are, in the grocery store where the ladies muscle her way up in line, wherever you are, if you're not taking up your cross daily and following Christ, you are not worshiping, and you will not become like him until you can start doing that. You don't just wake up one day and find yourself to be like Christ. It is an active thing. It requires attention and it requires deliberate action. Romans 12:2. Somebody find it for me and read it. Romans 12:2. You ought to know it by memory. I'll just tell you what it says. The last part of the verse says, do not conform, but be transformed. Remember that? Do not be conformed to the ways of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You have to change the way you think. If you're going to worship Christ, you have to change the way you think. Okay? And it's a daily thing. You can't say, okay, it's Sunday, I got to think about Christ now. It's a daily thing. All week long. It's taking up your cross and following him. We become like the God we worship. You got to remember that. Whatever it is you worship. Ephesians got a long list of it. Ephesians 5:5, a long list of things that are God's. Greed, sexual immorality. 5 or 6 things listed there. Colossians 3:5's got another list of things that we don't ordinarily think of as God's, but Paul makes it clear they are. And they're all conditions of the heart and the mind. You have to renew your mind. You have to change the way you think. Okay?